Hello, MCU fans. Today we're going to take a look at the question of how on earth did we end up with a paint universe? If you've seen Multiverse of Madness, then you know that they take a pretty crazy trip through the multiverse, and one of the crazier universes they land on is the paint universe. So, how on earth in our multiverse do we end up with a universe so vastly different from our carbon-based universe? I guess it's a paint-based universe. Well, we're going to take a lot of things from Marvel lore, as well as what scientists are saying about our universe, and I do believe we can come up with at least a pretty decent explanation for how we got a paint universe. So let's dive right in and see what we can find out. Okay, so first of all, there were actually several crazy universes in Multiverse of Madness that they flew through. The cartoon universe. And notice, each time they went into another universe, they adopted the physics of that universe. So Strange in America became cartoons. Presumably, therefore, if you're in a cartoon universe and come to our carbon-based universe, suddenly you're live action, right? So that's good news for Moon Girl and her future, in hopes that she does ultimately become live action in the MCU. And of course, Miles Morales. We got Across the Spider-Verse coming out this weekend. So yeah, very, very interesting that Marvel has canonized the idea that there are indeed universes made of, cartoons, and that if you move between universes, you adopt the physics of that new universe. Very cool. So we also saw the Cube universe. What on earth was that all about? And of course, it reminded me of when Thanos used the Reality Stone to turn Drax into cubes. So he actually adopted, just for Drax, the reality of another one of the universes. Very interesting. We also saw the Noir universe, where they basically turned to black and white and, with the scratches everywhere from like an old film. And of course, the Paint universe. So how did we get these universes? Okay. So let's look at the lore of the MCU first on the creation of the universe, and then we'll also sprinkle in some scientific information as well. All right, so we learned from the Eternals that the Celestials were the first thing at the beginning of time, if you will. In the beginning, before the six singularities, keep that in mind, and at the dawn of creation came the Celestials. Great. Also in Guardians Volume 1, the Collector pretty much says the same thing. Before creation itself, there were six singularities. Now, he doesn't mention the Celestials, but he does mention the six singularities. Also, in Thor the Dark World, Odin mentions that there are relics that predate the universe itself. And in this case, the relics he's referring to are the Infinity Stones, and in particular, the Ether, but really all of them. So he's saying the same thing. Before there was a universe, we had the relics, the singularities, etc. All right, so then after the Celestials and then the singularities, we then have creation. Arishem, the prime celestial, created the first sun and brought light into the universe. So there he is doing his work. Thank you, Arishem. We wouldn't be here without you. So also, though, we hear the same thing about the Big Bang from Guardians Volume 1. The Collector says, then the universe exploded into existence, and the remnants of these systems were forged into concentrated ingots, Infinity Stones. And we hear the same thing from Wong in Infinity War. Wong says, at the dawn of the universe, there was nothing. Then, boom. The Big Bang sent six elemental crystals hurling into the virgin universe. So he calls them crystals instead of stones, but same difference. So he's saying the same thing. The Big Bang gave us the Infinity Stones. Okay, then finally, Eternals tells us that life began and thrived and all was in balance. So I'm assuming he's describing, or this narration is describing the creation of our solar system. All right, so let's recap. We have the Celestials, then we have six singularities, then we have the creation of the universe, the Big Bang, by Arishem, presumably. Then the Infinity Stones are formed out of that Big Bang. And ultimately, then, we have the creation of the solar system. So that's the Marvel lore for how our universe and our solar system was created. All right, so what else do we know? We know that these Infinity Stones each control an essential aspect of existence. That is critical. That is critical. So, all the stones, Soul Stone, Space Stone, Time Stone, most importantly, I'm going to say the Reality Stone, define the essential aspects of existence. So keep that in mind. Also, we do learn from Endgame, the Ancient One says, the Infinity Stones create what you experience as the flow of time. So again, she's stressing that these stones are vital to the way the universe runs. And that in this case, she's talking about, hey, if you take the time stone away, you're going to mess up time for our universe. So keep that in mind, that the Infinity Stones basically control existence. Okay, great. So this is a very important step, therefore. It wasn't really until step 4 that we had the logic of our universe: time, reality, space, etc., power, on and on and on. So therefore, steps 1, 2, and 3, we didn't have those aspects. That is very interesting. Keep that in mind. That means before the Infinity Stones were formed, we really didn't have reality set for the universe, time, etc. Okay, so they talk a lot about singularities. What is a singularity? Marvel doesn't tell us, unfortunately. However, science does. So Universe Today says that a curvature singularity is best exemplified by a black hole. At the center of the black hole, space-time becomes a one-dimensional point which contains a huge mass. As a result, gravity becomes infinite and space-time curves infinitely. And here's the key: the laws of physics as we know them cease to function. Interesting. So basically, scientists are kind of saying the same thing Marvel is, that until we had the Infinity Stones, and therefore when we just had singularities, we didn't have physics. Interesting. So space.com says the universal origin story known as the Big Bang postulates that 13.7 billion years ago, our universe emerged from a singularity, a point of infinite density and gravity, and that before this event, space and time did not exist, which means the Big Bang took place at no place and no time. Wow. That's fascinating, right? No place and no time. So again, this idea that when we just had singularities, or as scientists say, one singularity for what it's worth, but Marvel says 6, we had no space, no time. Okay, so Marvel, I think, is representing, therefore, the singularities as a black hole. That there's a black hole that creates our universe. This image here is from Loki, season 1, episode 6, at the very beginning, and I'm still not sure 100% if what they're trying to say, and I think what they're trying to say is this is 2 different universes. We're seeing 2 different universes being formed, and each one formed by its own black hole. Because after this scene, they then enter the black hole, and we see time. So, okay, Marvel and science are both seeming to agree that before the Big Bang, so in steps 1 and 2, the celestials and the singularities existed in no time, no space, presumably no reality, because, they're in a singularity. So again, Marvel says there's 6, but whatever, right? Maybe there's one singularity that bursts into 6, regardless. Very interesting that science and Marvel, to some extent, it's all fantasy, I know, MCU is fantasy, I get all that, but still, it's interesting how they are applying science to some extent. So how were the Celestials, though, around when there was no space, no time, no reality? What on earth does that even mean for step number 1? I don't know for sure, but it is interesting. If we look at Guardians Volume 2, Ego talks about, at least for himself. Now, he was way after the Big Bang. Let's be clear. This is the solar system exists, etc. Nonetheless, he still says, the first thing I remember is flickering, adrift in the cosmos, utterly and entirely alone. So what we can learn from that is the Celestials, in this case, Ego, can exist with just basically a thought. He represented himself as a brain, right? But the Celestials are pretty darn powerful if he was able to then form a body and form a consciousness, etc. So is that potentially what the Celestials were like before the Big Bang? Were they just a thought? There's not even time. Time isn't even passing. Pretty wild to think about. But here's the real key. And also, let me share something interesting. This is the theory that a lot of people have, and I wish James Gunn would confirm it 100%. But many have said this brain, Ego, is the brain that came from nowhere. Wouldn't that be interesting to think about? Because remember, when we see nowhere, it's a shelled out head of a celestial. We don't see the brain. Ego could be the brain. Wouldn't that be interesting? A crazy theory, but I really like it if that's true. But all right, so the bottom line is the Celestials were able to exist with no space, no time, no reality, etc. Wild. They were just hanging out up there before creation of the universe. Wild. All right. It's also interesting just to throw in this one extra little bit of lore that Marvel just doesn't tell us enough to completely figure out. But the Dark Elves, we learn, came from darkness. Odin in Thor the Dark World says, long before the birth of light, there was darkness, and from that darkness came the Dark Elves. Now, we don't know when he says before the birth of light. Does that mean before the solar system? Does it mean before the universe? Or does it even just mean before Asgard? It's not real clear. So then we're left trying to figure out, well, where in here did the Dark Elves come from? I know that in the comics, at least I think in the comics, they were before the Big Bang. They were off in some strange universe or something. I don't really understand it. But in the MCU, they don't tell us. So my brain likes to put them somewhere after the universe was formed and after the Infinity Stones were formed, but before we had our solar system and light. But I don't know that it matters per se, because they just haven't told us enough. And if you personally believe it's before step 3 and they're out there hanging with the Celestials, that's fine too. I originally thought that's where they were, but once I began to look at this video and look at all the logic and the physics of things, it really feels like the Dark Elves are between steps 4 and 5. Anyway, just kind of interesting. Okay, one more thing to talk about. Time seems to be shown as a circle. So in Loki, episode 6, He Who Remains is showing the multiple universes when they discovered that there were multiple universes, the different Kangs. And notice they're kind of drawn as a circle with something in the center there. Now, maybe he's just trying to say this is the solar system at this point. That could be. But for certain, later in his explanation, when he says, I isolated the sacred timeline, notice it's clearly a circle. And when you look outside the Citadel at the end of time, it looks like a circle. Also, in Quantum Mania, notice there he is, seemingly holding a circle. And by the way, notice how similar this image and this image are. They're very similar. But anyway, and it's Kang in both cases, but that's just interesting how they use the same imagery. But notice he's holding a circle and talking about time and talking about how the chaos, and then notice his circle in his hand then expands above. So the circle above is that circle as he's saying the universes are colliding. So certainly Marvel seems to be treating time as a circle. So what do we do with that? Well, if we go back to science, there's something called the Big Crunch. And I'll be honest, I wasn't real familiar with this. I knew about the Big Bang. I hadn't looked really into the Big Crunch, but let's look at this. So the Big Crunch is theorized to be the end of our universe. It's one of the scenarios predicted by scientists in which the universe may end. Just like many others, it's based on Einstein's theory of general relativity, and that is, if the Big Bang describes how the universe most possibly began, the Big Crunch describes how it will all end as a consequence of that beginning. It tells us that the universe's expansion, which is due to the Big Bang, will not continue forever, and instead, at a certain point in time, it will stop expanding and collapse on itself, pulling in everything with it until it eventually turns into the biggest black hole ever. Wow. It will stop expanding and collapse into itself, pulling everything with it. Wild. Well, we know how everything is squeezed when it's inside the black hole, and hence the name Big Crunch. Okay. Science actually seems to go with what Marvel is saying, that we start and end with a black hole. Okay, well, we'll go with that, right? I mean, that's what Kang is basically saying is time is a circle. And it'd been really cool if they had a little black hole somewhere in this circle to make it really clear that's what they were saying, where the beginning and where the end is. And there had to be an original beginning. I mean, I don't think time has always been a circle, but who knows, right? I'd love to know what scientists think about that. Was there a beginning? I assume so. But anyway, time is a circle. So, okay, then we need to throw in one more step here, technically, the end of the universe, the Big Crunch. And you could argue that it's kind of wash, lather, rinse, repeat, right? That basically you're going through a circle here, and that is the circle that we We end with the big crunch. The Celestials are remnants from the previous now universe, and we get 6 singularities and a new Big Bang, and on and on and on. Again, the cycle had to start somewhere, but certainly this is where Marvel seems to be landing with all this. Okay, so what do we do with all of this, and how again did we get our paint universe? All right, well, we have one creation, we have one beginning to the multiverse, but very, very different universes. Because keep in mind, if this black hole is representing the singularities, we don't have the stones yet. We don't have reality, we don't have time, we don't have space, etc. But more importantly, we don't have reality. So I'm theorizing that as the universe was being created, as the Big Bang was happening, as the concept of time was there enough to have branching, that is when we branched into these crazier universes, into paint and noir and cube, cartoon, and of course our carbon-based universe. It would have to be while those singularities are forming into stones, so there's enough of the concept of time for there to be branching, because you got to have time for there to be branches, right? But while time is forming enough for there to be branches, reality is splitting into these crazy universes. From there, we then get, the multiverse continuing to expand. Of course, He Who Remains trapped the sacred timeline, but then when he died, boom, we had the expansions again. Now, whether there's actually multiple paint universes or not, I don't know. Whether there's multiple noir or cube, but we know there's multiple cartoon universes, because we have Moon Girl's universe, we have Miles Morales' universe, we have Spectacular Spider-Man's universe, etc. So that's really cool to think that once the cartoon universe was created from the ultimate Big Bang and has its own reality, it then started to expand. And of course, we know carbon-based universes have tons of multiverses. And then here's the key. Each of those have their own infinity stones. And that's why reality is different in each of them. And that's why from, I guess you could argue on the far right, if Doctor Strange and America were able to jump through all of these different universes, they're part of the same multiverse, but just very, very, very different realities. Also, a crazy thought, is it possible that if reality is different, is it possible time works differently in a given universe? Could that actually explain how Deadpool in the X-Men universe, which is clearly a separate universe in the multiverse, how he was able to use that Cable's time device and do some of the crazy things he did without creating branches? Because he jumped over and he killed, Ryan Reynolds before he read the Green Lantern script. And obviously he killed the lame Deadpool from Wolverine Origins. Now, I would like to have every universe branch, because I don't like time travel that rewrites time. However, it is a possible way to explain it, is to say that, hey, if you can have a paint universe, then you can certainly have another universe where time works differently and doesn't branch. Interesting. Just throwing that out there. Let me know what you think about that. I kind of hope personally that they retcon what Deadpool did to be creating branches, that he was jumping around, yes, but he was creating branches. Nonetheless, interesting to think. But okay, there you go. That is seemingly the order of creation in the MCU, and how we could end up with crazy different universes based on the fact that the Infinity Stones have different realities, have different time, etc. So let me know what you think. I'd love your comments on this. I've tried my best to stick with what Marvel has told us and not to go too far, out in left field, because I do think they've given us enough to be able to form some pretty good answers to this question of where on earth did a paint universe come from. But let me know what you think in the comments. Also, don't forget, we do have a Discord server. I will leave a pinned comment, so you can join that if you'd like, and I also have it in the description for the channel. And if you don't mind, like this video, subscribe if you haven't already. You can check out more content, and we can all continue to enjoy the ever-expanding, ever-growing Marvel Cinematic Universe.